Look at all these crackers.
Development hell. It's a term I'm sure most of you are familiar with. It's when a project basically fails to release and is stuck in a state of uncertainty. It can happen at various different stages of production. Filming could take longer than expected, various reshoots can happen, or maybe the post-production was just an absolute nightmare. But more often than not, most of these projects just fail to even get off the ground. The project can keep switching hands, with new writers and directors coming and going, studio execs can change things. Whatever the reason, movies can be delayed and unreleased for a long time, sometimes put on ice indefinitely. However, there are some that finally get the ball rolling and actually get made and released. The final product isn't always good, but it's pretty amazing that it got released at all. So I want to go through and talk about some movies that escaped this development hell. Now these won't be giant deep dives, but I do want to briefly talk about them. So strap in, relax, and let's get into it.
I'm gonna be a dad.
We're going to start off with a movie that is about to break free of development hell, and is really what inspired this video, and that's The Toxic Avenger. This is a remake of the 1984 superhero B-movie about a nerdy janitor who falls into a vat of toxic waste and comes back a monstrous superhero. Yeah, the original fits perfectly in the it's so bad it's good category. It's campy, it's schlocky, it's overacted, but above all else, it's really fun. And it grew quite a following, and even a few sequels. And 40 years later, people still talk about it. Hell, check out how many reviews it has on IMDb. That's actually really impressive for a very cheap, low-budget B-movie from the 80s. Anyway, fast forward a few decades to 2010, and there are talks of a remake of the cult classic in the works, with Steve Pink set to write and direct, and Arnold Schwarzenegger to star in it, though this never materialized. And in 2016, a different director was set to take on the project. But it wasn't even until 2019 when Legendary picked up the rights to actually reboot and make the movie. And then they switched to another director, this time Malcolm Blair. And this is when things finally started to get going, with the biggest names attached to the project being Elijah Wood and Peter Dinklage. And finally, by 2023, the movie was finished and premiered at a few small festivals. According to sources online, a lot of fans enjoyed it. It's an unrated, ultra-violent gore fest that leans a lot into the camp. But this is where some new issues start. The movie was done and ready to go, but no distributor wanted to pick it up. And apparently it was due to the level of gore and violence. Like I just said, and as is described online, it's an unrated film with ultra-violence and mutant nudity. So distributors said that it wasn't safe to market. It didn't have wide audience appeal, so no one wanted to do anything with it. They felt that it was just too big of a risk. And I know what you're thinking. The next step would be just to put it on a streaming service, right? Well, apparently to do that, they would still need a distributor. So the release of this film was just put on ice indefinitely. The possibility of this film coming out in any capacity was so low that one of the producers said that it would most likely just become lost media. Not long after, Peter Dinklage was asked about it, and he was very uncertain about its future too. So not only did it take 13 years after its original announcement in 2010 to get made, now that it's finally done, no one wants to release it. Any news and updates just completely went quiet. We didn't hear anything. But finally, after 2 years in limbo, they found a distributor. Cineverse will be taking on the task, and thanks to them, it's going to hit theaters and we'll finally be able to see it. Let's talk about one of the greatest action films of all time, Mad Max Fury Road. It's the fourth installment of the Mad Max franchise, and it's a hell of a film. Easily one of the best action films of the 2010s, but its development was a rocky road, and took the longest to get made out of any film in this franchise, with a 30-year gap between its release and the previous entry's release in 1985. Its rough production is pretty well documented, not only from different articles and news outlets covering it at the time, but it's also been talked about by different cast and crew members. So we're going to go through it and see why it took so long. Now, originally back in 1985, after Thunderdome's release, George Miller wanted to take a break since he felt he explored the character quite a bit with his 3 movies. But in the late 90s, Miller and a producer named Doug Mitchell started to kick around the idea of a new Mad Max film, and the idea of Fury Road started to bloom. Mel Gibson even agreed to come back, and Uma Thurman was apparently in talks to star in it too. It didn't take long to convince Fox, and they agreed to pick up the movie, with filming set to begin in March 2003 in Namibia. However, the first big problem happened, and it's a big one. So 9/11 happened, and several studios became tighter with their spending, especially if it involved flying cast and crew members to different locations out of the country. And just like that, production just stopped. In the meantime, George Miller decided to take a detour and work on Happy Feet. Yeah, he directed that. The guy is just so fucking talented. But Happy Feet didn't get finished and released until 2006. 3 years passed when they were supposed to start filming. But as soon as Miller was done, he was ready to focus on Fury Road. Second big issue. The star Mel Gibson was arrested for a DUI and was caught making anti-Semitic comments on camera. Needless to say, it wasn't a good look. So Miller decided to recast the leading role, and the hunt for a new Max began. And eventually, Tom Hardy was selected, and this time filming was set to begin in Australia in 2010. But of course, the issues didn't end there. In fact, a super rare occurrence happened. There was an absolute downpour just 2 weeks before filming was supposed to begin. So much rain that flowers actually began growing from the desert ground, and covering what was supposed to be a barren, post-apocalyptic wasteland. Now, Miller is a patient man, so he opted to just halt production and come back in a year to see if the desert dries up and to try again. But ultimately, they decided to film in Namibia like they originally planned. So now it's 2012. itself, and they're ready to begin filming again. But there's one more hurdle they have to overcome: the Namibian Coast Conservation and Management Project. You see, they were concerned about the local ecosystem, thinking it would be torn up by the big tires and smoke coming from the cars they would be using on set. So this delayed filming for a little bit, but after letting representatives visit the set, they were given the okay to finally begin filming. But then they had to halt filming because they just simply went over the budget, and there were several scenes just unfinished. But after renegotiating with Warner Brothers, they were able to get an extension as well as film the missing scenes, leading to some new pickup shots and additional photography. They finished up in 2013, and the movie released in 2015, blessing cinema screens all over the world. So after over 15 years of waiting, they were finally able to get the project off the ground and begin filming. And all I gotta say is, George Miller is a patient man, and the film was well worth the wait, which is the perfect way to describe the next entry on this list. Alita: Battle Angel. It's another movie that took decades to make. The original manga was released back in the early 90s and was shown to James Cameron by Guillermo del Toro, and Cameron just fell in love with the idea. So much so that by 2000, the gears were already turning to get the movie made. And even a website called battleangelalita.com was secured by Fox for James Cameron, just so they had the internet domain ready for when the movie actually gets rolling. After doing this and getting the rights to the film, there was a few years of silence, until 2003, when Cameron confirmed that he will be directing it, and that they were already working on a script. It was originally supposed to be his next film after he was done working on a TV series called Dark Angel, which apparently was inspired by Alita. But 2 years later, he actually ended up working on a documentary called Aliens of the Deep. But not only that, he said that his next film would not be Alita. Instead, it would be something else completely. That film ended up being Avatar, a movie he dreamt of making his entire life since he was a kid. Around the same time, he confirmed that he was working on 2 movie trilogies. One would be Avatar, and the other would be Alita. So the plan at this point seemed to be possibly bounce between the films, or do one trilogy then switch to the other. I'm not exactly sure how he was going to manage both, because at this point, he was still on to direct both of these trilogies. Now I want to take a moment to note here that the main reason why he pursued Avatar instead of Alita was because for a while, he was helping develop new CGI technology, and to properly test it, they needed full CGI characters and settings for large portions of the movie. Alita would have a mixture of actual people on screen with CGI throughout the whole thing, but to really use this new technology, he decided to focus on Avatar instead. Now 2009 rolls around, and Avatar releases, and it's the biggest movie in history. But there was a small update on Alita, and that's the script was done. But by 2010, James Cameron came to a crossroads. Even though Alita was still on his radar, he ultimately made the decision to focus on the 2 Avatar sequels instead, again pushing Alita to the back burner. And now he wasn't even sure if he was going to be able to direct it, since he'll be so preoccupied with Avatar 2 and 3. But he stated that he still wanted to get it made, but it will get pushed back again. Later on in 2013, he said that the production should start around 2017. We're at over 13 years at this point, and we're finally getting a better idea of when it's actually going to get going. But by 2015, still working on the Avatar sequels, James Cameron realized that he wasn't going to be able to direct Alita. So rumors started to spread that Robert Rodriguez was in talks to take over the project, which turned out to be true. According to Cameron, he gave Rodriguez the 186-page script that he's had completed for years, and the over 600 pages of notes, and tasked him with taking it and making a new script that he could shoot. And he did just that. Impressed, James Cameron picked him to take over the project. Though there were still some hurdles. Even though the script was done and a director was selected, there was still an issue with the budget. It was going to be expensive to shoot, and they were actually trying to break the budget down to around 150 to 200 million. Also worth mentioning that around this time, Disney was in the talks to try to acquire Fox, so that may have delayed some things. But after some negotiations, the movie was finally greenlit and set to release in 2018. They didn't hit this release date. Instead, it came out in January of 2019, just a few months later. Now, even though filming started in October 2016 and ended a few months later in February 2017, post-production actually took nearly 2 years to get all the visual effects done. And I gotta say, it was definitely worth the wait. This movie is so damn good looking. So almost 20 years after it was confirmed to be happening, Alita: Battle Angel finally released. It actually did well enough to warrant a sequel like they originally planned. Pulled in a little over 400 million. Yeah, believe it or not, the sequels are still a go, with it being confirmed as of 2023. James Cameron is still producing and Robert Rodriguez is still directing. Though the sequels seem to also be in development hell with no updates after 6 years, besides the one we got in 2023 saying, yes, they are happening. But honestly, it seems to be par for the course with James Cameron. If you look at his track record, there was a big gap in between Terminator 1 and 2, and a much bigger gap in between Avatar 1 and 2. He's an incredibly patient guy. I mean, he waited his whole life to make Avatar in general, so over half a decade really isn't anything to him. Now, I could go over Avatar: The Way of Water and the long production that took, but honestly, it's been covered to death at this point, so I'm not going to talk about it. Instead, I want to talk about another sci-fi epic by another renowned director.
I'm a big fan of Dune. Dude, Dune, your mom.
So Frank Herbert's Dune is to sci-fi what Lord of the Rings is to fantasy. It's a huge influential piece of work that more or less became the blueprint to sci-fi, or at least a key source of inspiration for many works in the genre. The book is so rich in detail and lore that it became known as one of the unfilmable novels. Now clearly there's been adaptations from the 80s, but most fans agree that they weren't really that good. No disrespect to the late David Lynch, it's a monumental task and not one that's easily accomplished. But after the first few attempts to adapt Frank Herbert's books, it seems studios just were kind of done with the IP, and many thought it just wasn't possible. Enter the Lord of the Rings trilogy. When Lord of the Rings released, it was a phenomenon. Not only is it one of the best trilogies of all time, but it's some of the best films ever made, period. Yeah, I love Lord of the Rings. But one effect after the first film's success is that studios started taking an interest in adapting fantasy books. And even though it's not technically fantasy, Dune was put back on the table as a possible IP to adapt again, after nearly 15 years since their last attempt, at least on film. There was a miniseries that was made that was received decently well, which showed that there was interest in this property. This was all discussed and brought up around the early 2000s, but information about this project was pretty scarce, and it's mainly because not a whole lot was happening with it, though finally it was picked up by Paramount in 2008, with Peter Berg set to direct. But a year later in 2009, he just left the project, and in 2010 another director was signed onto the project, but no progress was made, until Paramount just cancelled the movie altogether in 2011, and relinquished the rights to the film. Although that same year, Legendary would come in and discuss getting the rights to the film, and finally after 5 years of discussions, they finally acquired the film and television rights in 2016. Now as soon as this happened, director Denis Villeneuve wanted to make the movie. He was a lifelong fan of the book, and this would just be a dream come true. Although he did admit that he was a little nervous. It was a big task, and one that would require his full attention. He sat down with Legendary, and after they heard his vision for the film, they wanted him to direct. Although he wanted to wait until after he was done with 2016's Arrival and 2017's Blade Runner 2049. This would clear up his schedule so he can focus on it entirely, but also it'll give him some more practice filming sci-fi and basically mastering his skills before tackling a giant task like this. And in 2017, he was officially hired to direct. Not long after Arrival's Oscar nomination, so I guess it was a good thing he waited. So now we have a studio that's ready to make it, and someone willing to direct it. The next task would be the writing and securing funding. Villeneuve decided to write the script himself, and they eventually partnered with Warner Brothers. In 2018, they signed a 2-movie deal because Denis Villeneuve knew it wouldn't be possible to adapt a whole book in one film. With this agreement, they were able to secure funding for the first film, but they would have to wait and see how it does before committing fully to the second one. So finally, after 18 years, things were finally starting to move a little bit. A co-writer joined the project, along with several other people that Villeneuve worked with. Mostly people from Blade Runner 2049 and Arrival. Editors, cinematographer, production designers, visual effects managers, and many others. The following year was spent planning, writing, and announcing the cast, until finally July 2019, they began filming. Principal photography took about 3 months, but there were a few complications. The biggest being the heat. Since the movie takes place on a fictional planet called Arrakis, a giant planet of sand, they decided to film in Jordan and Abu Dhabi, resulting in several cast and crew members just getting heat stroke. But they managed to get it done, and it was set for a late 2020 release date. But as all of you are aware, something happened in 2020 that kind of delayed the release and kept people indoors. I can't remember what it was. But this made post-production and editing an absolute nightmare because it had to be done remotely. Needless to say, the late 2020 release date obviously didn't happen. And on top of that, beginning of 2021 marked a very interesting decision for Warner Brothers. Since no one could leave their homes, they decided to release all their major films of the year straight to their streaming service HBO Max, while releasing it simultaneously to theaters. Yeah, a lot of studios working with Warner Brothers weren't too happy about this, Legendary included, because they all feared for the profitability of their films. Since it was releasing online, why would you even bother going to the theaters to watch it? This applied especially to Dune, which cost $140 million to make. Even the director feared that it wouldn't turn a profit, so they couldn't make the sequel like originally planned. Apparently that 2-movie deal hinged on how financially successful the first one was, before they could actually put the sequel in production. Well, with the power of hindsight, we know that despite releasing on HBO Max the same day as theaters, it was still a huge success, bringing in a little over $410 million. Thanks to that and the praise and attention it was getting, they greenlit the sequels right away, along with a show on HBO Max. So despite waiting nearly 20 years to get Dune Part 1, we only had to wait 3 to get Dune Part 2 in 2024, with a third and possibly a fourth on the way soon. So after several previous attempts and 2 decades of waiting, the unadaptable novel got adapted, and received a lot of praise and attention, bringing new eyes to the series. So it looks like this time around, Dune worked and made a big impact, with more entries in the works. But now let's talk about another book adaptation that took forever to get going, but instead of making a splash when it finally released, it just sank.
Look at me. I'm Black Superman.
The Dark Tower series is basically Stephen King's passion project that he's been writing since the 80s. It's a bit of a western, bit of a fantasy / sci-fi, bit of a futuristic dystopian. It's a combination of a lot of things, and it pulls from several locations and characters and references other Stephen King books. It's a fascinating series, but it goes without saying that it would be hard to actually adapt. But the talks to actually make this a film series goes back all the way to the late 90s. But it wasn't until 2007 when names started to actually get attached to the project, the first of which was J.J. Abrams. At this time, he was known for Lost, and one of the other co-writers and creators from Lost was also attached. They were both fans of the Dark Tower, and were initially psyched to be able to bring it to life. So much so that they originally said they wanted to do a film for each book, which was 7 at the time. Though as they were wrapping up Lost, they started to have some reservations, stating that they found adapting the Dark Tower now to be kind of frightening. But then a couple of years later, in 2009, Damien Lindelof stated that after working 6 years on Lost, the last thing he wants to do is spend the next 7 years adapting one of his favorite books of all time. Then later that year, J.J. Abrams said, "The Dark Tower thing is tricky. The truth is, Damien and I are not looking at that right now." And with that, they just exited the project. It was clear that even though they were initially excited, after just doing 6 seasons of Lost, they didn't want to be stuck doing another project for that long. But not long after J.J. Abrams dropped the project, it was quickly picked up by Ron Howard and Universal Pictures, with the initial goal of making a trilogy of films along with 2 seasons of a television show. And Ron Howard was excited for this film. He mentioned in interviews that it was always on his mind, and he can't stop thinking about it. Hell, they were so keen on making this film that they announced a release date of May 2013. Although there was just one issue. Universal had yet to actually greenlight the movie. You see, they spent $5 million for the film rights, but then when looking at the numbers and try to actually make a television show plus a trilogy of films, they realized that it cost a lot more than they could actually handle. So they decided to lower the budget for the projects and had the script rewritten. Production was supposed to begin in September of 2011, but then it was pushed back to February 2012. But halfway through 2011, before they can make it to that point, Universal decided just to cancel the project altogether. But this didn't stop Ron Howard. He was keen on trying to get this made, so he actually took it over to Warner Bros. And see if they were interested. And they expressed some interest in it. Apparently HBO was going to make the show. So in 2012, Warner Bros. Looked things over, but ultimately decided that they're not going to go ahead with the project. After Warner Bros. Passed, the production company, Media Rights Capital, wanted to see if they could take over the project from Warner Bros. And that's exactly what happened. They took it off Warner Bros. Hands, and in 2015 they officially partnered up with Sony to get the film made. Ron Howard was no longer directing, but apparently he was still on as producer. And they were not messing around. They were set on getting this film made. They took the original script and started reworking it, as well as looking for a new director. They eventually landed on Nikolai Arcel, and not long after, the film was set for a January 2017 release date, which at this point was just under 2 years away. Then he started revealing that Matthew McConaughey and Idris Elba would star in the films, and then they began filming in April 2016. Yeah, as soon as they partnered up with Sony, they started fast-tracking this. Although when the film was shown to test audiences, it got some pretty poor reception, and Sony was thinking of canning Arcel and replacing him with a more experienced director. That didn't happen, and instead, he did the best he could, but maybe that's why the release date kept changing. Initially, it was set to release in January 2017, but then it was pushed back to February, and then it was moved to July, before finally landing on August. Maybe it was given more time to actually fix it, since the initial reception wasn't that good. And when the film finally came out in 2017, it was kind of panned by everybody who saw it. Fans didn't like it, newcomers didn't like it, general audiences just didn't like it, which honestly shouldn't come as a surprise. When it was initially pitched, it was supposed to be a series, adapting each book into its own film. But after several rewrites and changing hands, along with changing and compressing several aspects of the source material, it just kind of came out as a boring mess. And I saw rumors online speculating that the reason why this film was fast-tracked is because they had the rights and they just wanted to get it done. And I mean, technically, they did kind of make their money back. The movie cost about $60 million to make and pulled in $113 million. So it was at least a little successful, financially anyway. Audiences, fans, critics, no one seemed to like this film. And there's been no word on the original planned sequels. Yeah, so after nearly 17 years of waiting, changing 3 different directors and 3 different studios, the movie came out and it was basically a dud. Though, as of recently, Mike Flanagan will be adapting The Dark Tower into a series. And considering his track record, it's probably going to be pretty good.
What?
Comic book movies are notorious for being stuck in development hell. This Spider-Man movie was pitched back in the 90s, but didn't get released until 2002. Then of course there's the original Fantastic Four movie. Hell, as I speak, that Blade show or movie or whatever it's supposed to be has yet to get off the ground. And who else remembers when they announced Jamie Foxx as Spawn? Apparently Blumhouse is supposed to be making it, but it's been what, like 8-9 years? But there are some that do end up escaping development hell. In this whole final section, I want to cover those. There are quite a few, so these might be a little bit shorter, but I at least want to talk about them for a little bit. Alright, you ready? Let's go. We're going to start with one of my favorite favorite movies of all time, Watchmen. The original graphic novel, yes, I'm calling it that, I don't care what Alan Moore says, released back in 1986, and not long after, Fox picked up the rights to adapt it into a movie. Needless to say, Alan Moore hated this and didn't want any involvement whatsoever. So they proceeded without him, with the script even being written, but they realized just how expensive this would be to actually produce and make. And also, it's pretty hard to adapt. It's a very dense story. So they reached out for some help, and this when the project was picked up by Warner Brothers, and Terry Gilliam was taking over the movie. But after several long years of trying to find a way to adapt it without going over the budget, he eventually got frustrated and deemed it unadaptable. This is all in the 90s, by the way. So the project went silent for years, until the rights were shifted again to Universal, who took a crack at it back in 2001, and then they shifted again to Paramount in 2004, who also took their chances, but none of them were successful. It eventually made its way back to Warner Brothers, but this time, in 2005, there were serious efforts to get this movie made. They were looking around for a director that was up to the task, and that's when Zack Snyder enters the picture. Coming off just making 300 for Warner Brothers, they approached him with the idea of adapting Watchmen, and he just jumped on the opportunity. Snyder described that one big issue was reworking the script to put back in more of the source material. You see, he wanted to adapt as much as possible, and this led to some budget issues during production. Originally, they wanted to keep it somewhere below 100 million, but with what Snyder wanted to shoot, it would almost double that. Eventually, the budget landed around 130 to 150 million. So it looks like things were finally on track. They had a director, they had a budget, they were ready to shoot. Except there was one more issue. The original rights holder, Fox, decided to sue Warner Brothers. So, long story short, Fox claimed that they still have distribution rights to the film adaptation of Watchmen, and then Warner Brothers argued that they actually didn't. They ended up going to court, and they ruled in Fox's favor, and they came to an agreement. But finally, once that was all settled, the movie started production and released in 2009, after being passed around for over 20 years. Since we're talking about comic book movies from the 2000s, let's talk about X-Men. During the early and late 2000s, X-Men was as popular as ever. After rounding out a trilogy of films, what was next? Well, more sequels, prequels, and spin-offs, of course. And X-Men Origins Wolverine was first up. Of course, the movie came out and wasn't that good, but that's not the topic of this section. Instead, it's one of its biggest botches that's in the film, and that's Deadpool. Yeah, this was nothing like Deadpool we all knew. It was so bad that even Ryan Reynolds knew that this was going to upset fans, and he was right. It effectively killed any chance of the character getting a solo movie, like what was originally planned. Yeah, you see, later on, rather recently actually, Ryan Reynolds revealed that by doing this version of Deadpool in X-Men Origins, Fox would then allow him to do a solo Deadpool movie afterwards. So he stuck it out and did what he was told, and we saw what happened. So the prospects for a solo Deadpool movie were just gone. But fast forward a couple of years and something strange happens. Some test footage from this cancelled Deadpool movie leaks online, and it just sets the world on fire. People liked it a lot. The reception was so positive, in fact, that the movie gets greenlit almost immediately. And well, the rest is history. Deadpool finally comes out in 2016 and it's an absolute hit, and ends up getting 2 sequels. It's kind of funny because just as quickly as it was scrapped, it was then resurrected. Now there are fan theories about where this clip came from, the one that got it greenlit. Some people think that it was Fox leaking it themselves to test how people would react before proceeding with it. But the more popular theory is that Ryan Reynolds leaked it himself, to give it attention and to show Fox that people would love it. Well, after almost 10 years since the leak, Ryan Reynolds was asked about it and he basically said yes without technically admitting to it. So this was a comic book movie that once it escaped development hell, people absolutely loved it. But there are several examples of ones that escaped that just weren't worth the wait. So let's talk about some of those now. So this little double feature from DC's first cinematic universe, Black Adam and The Flash. I think we should clump these two together because they have some similarities as to why they were delayed. You see, basically, Warner Bros. Didn't know what they wanted to do with them or how to even use them. So back in 2014 and 2015, Warner Bros. Announced that they would be launching their own cinematic universe for the DC heroes. And a part of that lineup was Black Adam and the Flash solo movies. Although technically the idea for a new Flash movie was kicked around all throughout the 2000s, but never got off the ground. It was only once Warner Bros. Wanted to make a shared universe they finally really put some efforts into getting it made. And it's a similar case with Black Adam. Even though The Rock's star in it made big news back in 2014, it actually goes back further, all the way to 2007 when it was first revealed that he was going to be starring in it. But similar to The Flash, it's almost like they didn't put that much attention into actually trying to get it made, or just simply didn't know what to do with them or how to use them. So the projects just didn't go anywhere. So for the sake of time and my own sanity, I'm just going to go over the DCEU era of these projects, because that's when Warner Bros. Decided to actually put attention into them. Let's do The Flash first. Like I already mentioned, it was announced to be part of the new DCEU back in 2015. Then we got Ezra Miller announced to be the star, but not only that, the Flash appeared in Batman v Superman, along with the rest of the Justice League lineup. So far, so good, right? Well, things immediately took a turn for the worse when the reception of Batman v Superman got back to Warner Brothers. They panicked and scrambled and immediately started changing things. Basically, every DC project was affected to some degree, including the Flash. After Justice League dropped in 2017, the Flash solo movie just started switching hands, and no one knew what to do with it. At least, Warner Brothers didn't. The story changed from writer to writer, writer and from director to director. Hell, even Grant Morrison was involved at some point, but I don't think his story went anywhere either. After 4 years of no real update, Warner Bros. Confirmed that they finally have a solid director. This is like the third or fourth one, by the way. And filming was officially starting soon. Of course, COVID delayed things, but not only that, Ray Fisher, who played Cyborg, was supposed to have a role in the film. But right before they started filming, he spoke out against Joss Whedon, and well, he was removed from the project. So yeah, a lot of reshoots and rewrites happened very last minute. But finally, after numerous delays, the movie was released, and it was basically the Flashpoint paradox like everyone suspected it was for years. But more importantly, this movie was kind of used as a way to introduce the multiverse and, well, set up a reboot. But it received some pretty poor reviews and a terrible box office pull. That could be due to Warner Bros. Announcing a year ahead of time that James Gunn rebooting the universe was going to happen, making a lot of the current DC movies at the time feel unnecessary and pointless. It could also be all the shit Ezra Miller was getting into that tainted the movie and made people not want to support it. Or it could be the movie itself just really wasn't that good. Regardless, after over 6 years in development hell and cycling through different writers and directors, it just came and went. Honestly, it really wasn't worth the wait. Though it did feature one of the best Batfleck scenes, so props for that. Now Black Adam, on the other hand, was mostly quiet. Again, the movie was stuck in development hell with no updates besides the fact that The Rock would be in it. Unlike The Flash, it didn't cycle through as many writers and directors, at least not publicly anyway. There just weren't any grand announcements about what was going on with it, at least until 2020. That's when they finally revealed that it's actually getting worked on. The Rock has his own little announcement and promo and everything, and once the ball got rolling, it was everywhere. The Rock was promoting this movie like his life depended on it. Apparently during filming, there were issues happening behind the scenes, having to do with the tone and direction of the movie, and supposedly all the issues that were happening with DC and Warner Bros. At the time, with the shifts of power and change of focus, causing some conflicts on the production, although I couldn't find anything specific. Then there were rumors about reshoots happening due to poor test screenings, as well as a delay from its original February 2022 release date. But finally, after several years of silence and a few years of production, it dropped to an astonishing meh. Yeah, this is a movie that was announced, went quiet, started making a lot of noise once it went into production, but once it released, it didn't match the hype it was trying to perceive online. It was pretty derivative with some cool action sequences, but that's about it. Nothing to write home about. It was also a strange movie because, in a way, it felt like it was trying to center itself as the new focal point of the DCEU, bringing in Justice Society of America, and even Henry Cavill back as Superman. There's even a scene where Hawkman and Black Adam are fighting in a room full of Justice League memorabilia, and they end up destroying the whole thing. It feels almost like a metaphor, but clearly Warner Bros. And DC didn't end up going that route. So after several years in development hell, the Flash movie turned out to be a way to soft reboot a bunch of stuff and introduce the multiverse. And it seems The Rock wanted Black Adam to be the new focal point of the DCEU, but they ended up just dropping it entirely. Both failed to really make a splash, and knowing what we know now, it's clear Warner Bros. Just wanted to get these projects out of the way so they can focus on James Gunn's new universe and a fresh start. But let's finish this video off with a DC movie that fans not only wanted, but actively tried to get Warner Bros. To release. The story of the Snyder Cut Justice League is pretty well known at this point. It's been talked about and covered to death, including by yours truly. So I'm gonna assume you're all familiar with the story and just give like a broad overview, but it's still one hell of a journey. So remember earlier when I mentioned the backlash of BVS changed a lot of DC projects? Well, one of the most butchered was Justice League. While The Flash, Black Adam, and other DC movies mostly got delayed, some of them indefinitely, Justice League was in pre-production and set to release in 2017 the following year. No ifs, ands, or buts. So changes were made immediately. For starters, the script was rewritten, and a 2-hour runtime mandate was implemented. Originally, Justice League was supposed to be in 2 parts, so this would drastically change the whole movie. But not only that, apparently the studios and producers gave scenes that they wanted filmed that Snyder had to do on top of what he wanted to do, which led to a struggle back and forth about which takes they were going to use, just leading to a very difficult shoot all around. But unfortunately, while they were wrapping up the filming, Snyder's daughter passed away, and while they were editing, he would have to leave the project. And that's when Warner Bros. Put Joss Whedon in charge, and from here it was a series of rewrites and shooting new footage and recutting the whole movie, merging what Snyder already filmed with the new footage, as well as changing the score, leading to the Frankenstein monster movie that was dropped in 2017. The movie came out, it was panned, and everybody dunked on it. And Warner Bros. Just kind of washed their hands in the situation and just tried to move on. But not long after, there were rumors and murmurs of an alternate version of Justice League, a different cut, a Snyder cut. Then images started to surface online from Snyder's own Vero account of various scenes and images from Justice League, images that we've never seen before, and it piqued a lot of people's interest. Now I'm not going to go over everything that happened the following year, because it was a lot of stuff, but basically, there weren't only vocal outcries from fans about this different cut of Justice League, but there were various stunts to get Warner Bros. Attention, and for a while they just denied its existence. But more images trickled online, and various statements from cast and crew members started confirming that yes, this is real. Then finally, in 2019, on the 2-year anniversary of Justice League, there was a campaign to get a hashtag trending on Twitter. Hashtag release the Snyder Cut, and it got a lot of traction, not only from the fans, but the stars were tweeting it too, though Warner Bros. Still remained quiet. But this stunt got a lot of attention. Later on, Snyder would confirm that because of this stunt, Warner Bros. Did reach out to him privately with the idea of releasing the unseen footage, though there was a caveat. It wasn't going to be completed. It was going to be all the unfinished scenes and previs, either as a bonus feature or possibly spliced into the movie with incomplete music, CGI, and special effects. Snyder declined because he knew this wasn't what fans wanted. So 2020 rolls around, and fans are still interested and petitioning to see Snyder's cut, but no word yet about it actually coming out. But then, out of nowhere, Snyder revealed with Henry Cavill that yes, it's finally happening. Snyder stated that with COVID shutting down production on new movies being made, as well as Warner Bros. Getting ready to launch their new streaming service HBO Max, it all kind of worked out, and they were finally willing to let him finish the movie, finishing the CGI, VFX, and the score. And Snyder even filmed just a few additional scenes to add to the movie as well, since he knew he probably wouldn't have another chance. So it all really did work out because 1, no one could work on any new movies, and 2, they needed something for their streaming service. So why not finish up the movie that is already filmed and it's just sitting there that people are actively telling you they want? And then from here, I think you know how it goes. The movie finally comes out on HBO Max, and it's a hit. A lot of people like it. Fans celebrate, and it leads to the biggest hashtag in history. Hashtag restore the Snyderverse. Of course, that didn't happen. Obviously, they're moving forward with James Gunn and his DC universe. But it's still pretty amazing that this movie even exists in the first place. It was butchered and changed the entire production, then denied to even exist by the studio. But thanks to fan outcry and interest, it was able to be released. And I think it's gonna about do it for the video. I know I could have gone into more detail about several of these, but there were quite a few, and I thought it'd be easier and simpler to give like a broad strokes approach. Just a simple overview of what happened. And odds are I probably got some things wrong. If I did, let me know in the comments. But yeah, I think that'll about do it. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, leave a dislike if you didn't. But yeah, that's it. I'm gonna go to bed.
I didn't mean to have sex with him. I was just gonna jerk him off. That's all.
Excuse me, I'm getting a call. Hello? What am I doing? I'm playing the Outer Worlds. Hello? Yeah, this is Mark. They hit the second tower?